Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. One of my favorite sort of summer traditions when those magazines come out. Now, they've been out for a little while. I just haven't been able to make my way to my local big box book reseller or bookseller to get them. But I do have a couple of them in my hands here today. They will be a part of our proceedings. And as you might guess, some skepticism and some questioning of Georgia on the part of some anonymous coaches in these magazines. I have the proof right here in my hands, dropped on the desk. It'll be a part of today's program. Also, special guest, Cody Chaffins steps in for Terrence Edwards, who's busy on the football field working with his high school team. So we'll have Cody here today. We have a follow-up on a story that is now going on 4 days worth of action around the SEC that does involve Georgia. We'll give you that here today. So a lot going down, all of it fun. We are in a good mood. We just kind of like this time of year. Summer cadence, relaxed, having a good time. So let's have you be a part of it with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of my favorite times of the summer is when those preseason magazines show up on newsstands. Now, I will tell you, I am kind of old school in that I like magazines a lot. College football magazines, all magazines. If you go on our DawgNation cruise, you'll see me like toting a magazine around, going to the beach or something like that. I like the way that magazines make me feel. So as long as they keep making magazines, I will keep buying them. Now, there are fewer magazines than there used to be. If you go to your local newsstand, you may notice that. There's just not quite as many, and some of them that are there get a little smaller, it seems like. But I like magazines. I'm a fan of them. I like college football preview magazines especially. And I especially like it when the college football preview magazines set us up for a conversation that, as Georgia fans, we're pretty comfortable having. I think we have an example of that today. But before we get into that, can we just on video here appreciate for a moment? If you listen to podcasts, you don't see this, and obviously we kind of think of ourselves primarily as a podcast, so we very rarely do, at least I try to anyway, do anything that works more for video than audio, because we started on audio, and it'll always be kind of sort of my home platform in a lot of ways. But for the video audience, we have a big screen over my shoulder, and that screen provides a little bit of a preview for our conversation. And the screen over my shoulder says, "Anonymous coach questions UGA," which I think is fun. But the picture, which I think is even more fun, is this coach who's been kind of like, it's almost like an episode of like 60 Minutes when you have like, some whistleblower or something like that. You've got the darkened face of the coach here, which I just think works so well for what we're doing here today. I think that's really, really funny and a great way to set all this up, because admittedly, I am a fairly simple person. Many of you who've been with us for a good number of years, you sort of know what I like, because it never really changes. I love when these magazines have these like blurbs from the so-called anonymous coaches. In the Athlon Preview magazine, which I'm going to read from here in a moment, it's a anonymous SEC opposing assistant coach. So one of the things that, sometimes the anonymous source, in various media reports is sort of kept anonymously, because if you revealed who it was, you realize, oh, this is not that interesting of a person. It's not like that big of a deal of who it is that's speaking here. Sometimes anonymity sort of makes the source sound better than it probably would be. I do like the fact that Athlon has gotten a little bit more specific about what this is. Okay, this is an SEC assistant coach that competes against this other team, and we're just keeping them, anonymous so they can be a little bit more candid. I do kind of like the specificity they now give us. I feel like that's a little bit different than it used to be previous years ago. And as I said before, I kind of like the fact that all of this sort of sets us up for a good conversation. We don't read a lot around here, A, because I guess I'm not that good of a reader, but B, just because we just sort of shoot from the hip, typically speaking. But just for a moment, in honor of the Athlon Sport, and this, by the way, this is not an ad. I mean, they should send me free magazines for life, as much publicity as I give them. But this is not an ad. This is, like I said, just for fun on the show. I want to read to you what an opposing SEC assistant coach says about Georgia in the Athlon Sports Preview magazine. Some of this you will maybe agree with, but some of this you will also kind of recognize as a tone that is pretty familiar in terms of what we've been talking about. We even talked about this yesterday a little bit. Of boy, when it's in the depth of summer, when the season still feels a couple of months away, people have a tendency to just sort of say all kinds of stuff. This is perhaps an example of that. I'm going to show you the text on the screen. It's not necessarily meant to read because it's just a photo of the magazine. But what you're seeing on your screen, if you're watching video, is what I'm about to read to you right now. Opposing SEC assistant coach says of Georgia, all eyes are on the offense. They have questions at pretty much every position group here. For instance, is Gunnar Stockton a legit QB1? Can they replace the offensive line? Can the receiving core improve? Do they have a guy behind Nate Frazier in the backfield? Last season, this coach says, they look sort of muddled. Not bad, but you got the idea they weren't confident in one particular area of their attack. He says defensively, it's still an elite group, but they're thin at linebacker. I don't think this is the same level of talent that we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years. I think you might see a decline, at least at first, on both lines of scrimmage. The biggest question mark will be the offense under Gunnar Stockton. He says they didn't chase any portal guys, so let's see if the kid can become elite. So there is obviously a lot that we can unpack here. For instance, I think one of the problems with magazines is that you have to start preparing these things many months in advance. You have to send it to the printer, I'm assuming, at least a month in advance, you got to imagine. So, by the time we get the thing in our hands, a lot has changed in college football. For instance, when this opposing coach says, do they have a guy behind Nate Frazier in the backfield? Well, we know, for instance, that Georgia did try to address that need, going out and getting Josh McCray in the spring portal from Illinois. So this is perhaps an example of that was a very pertinent question when this stuff started getting collected to be a part of a magazine that would go on newsstands many months later, but in kind of the fast-moving news cycle of college football. Okay, well, since then, Georgia sort of found an answer to that. Also, you can kind of nitpick with the guy says they're thin at linebacker. I hope he means outside linebacker. That, to a degree, might be true. If it's inside linebacker, then this guy's probably destined to get fired pretty soon because we would say that Georgia's maybe got the best quartet of inside linebackers anywhere in college football, but let's not make too big of a deal about that. And, by the way, all of the stuff these opposing coaches, anonymous coaches, say about the Georgia defense, we're actually going to kind of focus in on a lot of that tomorrow. It's just sort of hard to do everything in one day. We're going to kind of look at the offensive part of this just for a minute. And specifically, we are going to look at the stuff being said about Gunnar Stockton. We are going to ignore the fact that they do misspell Gunnar's name in this. We're going to ignore that here for a moment and focus specifically on the fact that this opposing SEC assistant coach apparently has some pretty big questions about Gunnar Stockton. And stop me if you've heard any of this before. He first of all says, as you heard a moment ago, is Gunnar Stockton a legit QB1? He later concludes by saying the biggest question mark is going to be on the offense with Stockton. He says they didn't chase any portal guys, so let's see if this kid can become elite. Now, let me pause on that idea just for a moment. What we have said repeatedly, and we will continue to say because leaders are repeaters, what we have said continuously and will continue to say is Gunnar Stockton does not have to be elite for Georgia to be elite. Georgia can win the national championship without Gunnar Stockton becoming a future first-round quarterback. Now, that doesn't mean that Gunnar Stockton might not become a great player. Obviously, maybe he does. And certainly Georgia is going to obviously ask Gunnar Stockton to be a successful quarterback. They are going to ask him to be a capable quarterback. But, there are certain words in sports, we throw them around so much, they end up losing all meaning. Elite is one of those words. We throw around elite left and right that we kind of forget that in any sort of area of life, mostly in sports for us, elite is connected to scarcity. An elite is connected to rarity. And to be honest with you, we don't think that Gunnar Stockton needs to be a rare quarterback. We don't think he necessarily needs to display a scarce set of skills. If you're some quarterback playing for some lesser team, you better be a superhero. Otherwise, that lesser team is not likely to succeed. But Georgia, folks, is not a lesser team. It's the reigning SEC champs, a couple of years removed from back-to-back national champs, beat Texas twice, preseason top 5, consistently ranked among the most talent-rich programs in college football. A team that has that much going for it does not need an elite quarterback. Case in point, as you've heard me say before, last year's national champion, Ohio State, got there on the back of a quarterback who was eventually drafted in the 6th round of the NFL draft. That maybe Gunnar Stockton's better than that. But if Gunnar Stockton is as good as a late-round NFL draft pick, Georgia, because it has, we think, a similar talent level to Ohio State, could also win the national championship. So can we please stop with this thing of, is Gunnar Stockton elite? It's almost like that old cliche, the meme from a few years ago about Joe Flacco being elite. The reason why that became a thing on the internet, because it was such a dumb question. It was intentionally dumb, I believe. It's the same thing here. Can Gunnar Stockton be elite? Folks, that's irrelevant to the overall success level for Georgia. I'm a fan of Gunnar Stockton. I'd love for him to be elite. But as I've said, if Gunnar Stockton's just sort of the typical Georgia starting quarterback, then Georgia itself as a team has a chance to be elite, which is what we obviously care about more than anything else. But let me also kind of take this conversation and kind of move it in this direction for a moment. That all of this of, is Gunnar Stockton elite? You got questions at quarterback. Guy says all eyes are on the offense. Questions everywhere on offense. A lot of negativity around there. And as I told our guy Mike Griffith yesterday, negative appraisals of Georgia are potentially valid opinions. We are not gatekeepers of negativity around here. We are not automatically the enemy of someone who wants to express some skepticism of Georgia, because sometimes the skeptics are right. Like, to mention another meme here for a moment. What's the thing about, the haters said we couldn't do it. Well, come to find out they were right. Honestly, good call by the haters. Have you ever seen that tweet before? It's kind of a famous one. And to be honest with you, the haters the last 2 years that said that Georgia couldn't win the national championship, as it turns out, good call by the haters. They kind of got that one right. Georgia did not win the national championship. All we have said, though, this offseason is if you are a skeptic, while you may turn out to be right, and in the past, those who have gotten it right about Georgia, we have more than happily given them credit, because we're not liars around here. We have more than happily given them credit. What we've said, though, is that if you want to be the skeptic, if you want to question Gunnar Stockton, if you want to do all that kind of stuff, we're not going to give you the same level of grace that Athlon gives the anonymous coach here. We are not going to give you anonymity. We want you to attach your name to it, and we reserve the right to remember what you say. And we feel pretty comfortable about saying that and feeling that way because we are in very good company. Because apparently, Georgia coach Kirby Smart feels very much the same way. In fact, when you listen to the anonymous coach, or when you listen to me read from you for the Athlon magazine, the anonymous coach kind of asking some pointed questions about Gunnar Stockton, expressing some skepticism in the Georgia offense because of Gunnar Stockton. Doesn't it remind you a little bit of the exchange that Paul Feinbaum and Kirby Smart had on the Feinbaum show going back a couple of weeks ago when they were there at Destin, Florida for SEC spring meetings, and what Feinbaum had said on ESPN TV kind of got called out by Kirby Smart. This was a fun exchange. In the same way I say to anonymous coach or random media person, whatever else, we're going to remember you. If you want to use Gunnar Stockton as a fodder for a hot take, we're going to remember. We're going to remember. And if you're right, hand to the sky in front of everybody, I will give you credit for that. If you are wrong, we may remind you of that there as well. It's exactly what Kirby Smart told Paul Feinbaum the other day. Let me start with what Feinbaum had said on ESPN TV that had apparently kind of gotten Kirby a little stirred up about this. This is from a couple weeks ago.
I appreciate all your questioning of it because it just gives me a little extra.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad you missed an earlier interview I did on ESPN because I
didn't miss it. I didn't miss it.
Okay.
Georgia will be fine or not fine with Gunnar Stockton now their starting quarterback.
I would say that's a big not fine. I know the team coalesced around him after the SEC championship game, but I was underwhelmed by what I saw from Gunnar Stockton in the Sugar Bowl loss to Notre Dame.
So there you go. Feinbaum says, hey, I don't think Gunnar Stockton is going to be fine, kind of echoing what the anonymous coach is perhaps saying here. And what we loved about this was not because we know how Gunnar Stockton is going to play, but because we believe that Gunnar Stockton, if he's earned the trust of the Georgia coaching staff, is sort of set up to be a typical Georgia starting quarterback. We love the fact that, going back to that interview, was it 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, that Kirby Smart gave a strong retort to Paul Feinbaum for expressing so much public doubt in Gunnar. Take a listen to this.
I just always hope that when I say these things at a busy time like this, that you are not. But I'm looking at a man whose job it is to tell you what's being said, right?
Yeah, I'm excited. Gunnar got the message, man. He got the message. You did your job.
Okay. Listen, I have admired you and respected you for so many years.
Absolutely.
I feel like
way.
at this point in your career, you need a little help from me.
I appreciate
to get
that.
you to the first game and over the finish line.
I'm glad you did. You've always been. That's why I always come on your show, because I love the fact that you give me that motivation.
So all of that was kind of in good fun. Paul was laughing. Kirby was laughing. It's essentially done for entertainment. But this is very familiar for Kirby and for those of us who are Georgia fans, that Kirby kind of likes that sort of thing. Oh, Gunnar Stockton got the message. He heard you. You're helping him. You're fueling him for the season he's about to have. Now, on a serious point, we told you whenever this thing first happened, pay attention to Kirby's level of confidence. You don't joke. You're incapable of joking unless you have a certain degree of confidence. You have to have some confidence to have the ability to kind of laugh about something. So if Kirby's laughing about what's being said about Gunnar, including in the face of the person who said it, that means he must have some level of confidence about Gunnar Stockton. We should pay attention to that. But there's also this, that Kirby is so comfortable with that sort of thing. I think some Georgia fans in the past have sort of put on their tinfoil hats and they've said, wait, is all of this orchestrated by Kirby Smart? For instance, when we have these anonymous coaches in these magazines that are always saying these bad things about Georgia, it's not uncommon to find Georgia fans in a half-kidding, half-serious way saying, wait, is Kirby Smart this anonymous coach? Is he the one that's saying all this bad stuff? Because, as he told Paul Feinbaum, his players enjoy being fueled by that sort of thing. And around here, when it comes to Georgia fans, thinking that, whether it's half-kidding, half-serious, or sort of something in between, there is ample fodder from why that is. It's the famous Nolan Smith thing going back to Georgia's national championship season of 2022, and the idea, the legend that somehow someone somewhere had predicted Georgia prior to that season to go 7-5. Do you remember this? I guess this started with our friend Maria Martin from Channel 11 interviewing Nolan Smith after the national championship game. And Smith, who is a very big personality, genuinely very funny, was, but just also just sort of warm, just kind of a magnetic guy. You're sort of drawn to him. And with Maria Martin on Channel 11, 11 Live, WXIA, I believe, he was telling her, hey, listen, before the season, everybody says we were going to go 7-5. This is sort of a classic Georgia moment. Let me play you a little bit of this, because doesn't it kind of feel like we're kind of going back into 7-5 territory a little bit right now? This is Nolan with Maria from Channel 11.
That's all I got to say. They thought we was going to go 7-5. We end up perfect. I could talk trash now because I'm done. I'm a dog for life, and I will always be a dog.
They thought we were going to go 7-5, and this sort of became one of those now it can be told stories where shortly after that, a website called Saturday Down South, Connor O'Gara is one of the guys that works there. Nolan actually appeared with Connor on a podcast and finally admitted that the whole 7-5 thing was honestly just sort of made up, like literally kind of came from nowhere, at least according to Nolan's own telling of it. This is from 2 years ago. Nolan telling Saturday Down South the whole 7-5 thing that he apparently told the media about after the national championship game, told his teammates about all season long. He says, honestly, admittedly, I just sort of made it up.
You know that nobody said that you guys were going 7-5 last year, right?
Yes. Yeah. You got to create the own narrative, man. Sometimes, you got to put the chip on your own shoulder. But we did have a humongous target on our back, as we saw in the Missouri game.
That's very true. Very true. But I just needed that to be known of like, we're not that dumb. We're dumb. We're not that dumb.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to juice it up for the guy, especially when you're old man last year. I just wanted everybody to know. I said it the whole summer. They're going to think we're going 7-5, guys. They ain't even thinking about a 2P. So
you made that entire thing up. You just picked that out of the air. You're like, all right, I'm just going to throw 7-5. That sounds disrespectful enough.
Yeah, 7-5 is like disrespectful enough. And that's what like Coach Smart did. I think not to disrespect any of the other teams, but I think Coach Smart went like 8-4 like his first year. So I was like, yeah, 7-5 though sounds better. And it sounds better off the tongue. 7-5.
You're exactly right.
7-5. They say we're going 7-5, guys.
So Nolan completely admits, I totally made up the whole thing. And it kind of makes me wonder, can that be re-racked? Whatever like the magic was and the guys, we're going 7-5. These guys think we're going 7-5. Can you do that again? For instance, if you really do have apparently an assistant coach who competes on the Georgia schedule against it, telling a national magazine that I don't think this is the same level of talent we've seen the last 3 to 4 years. I think you might see a decline on both lines of scrimmage. Is this 7-5 territory here? Can you do this again with Feinbaum ripping Gunnar Stockton on TV, other people ripping Gunnar Stockton at every turn? Is this 7-5 territory? For instance, we had go for 2 in 22 and it worked really well. We tried go for 3 in 23. Didn't work quite so great. Didn't quite get over the finish line with that. Can we do 7-5 and 25 and kind of get that one going? I don't know. Sort of feels like there might be some fertile soil for that right now. Taking the page out of the Nolan Smith book. Maybe Georgia behind the scenes is already doing its own version of that. But let me also conclude by saying this. I think there's a reason why Kirby Smart can laugh in the face of the magazine skepticism, the Paul Feinbaum skepticism in his quarterback, Gunnar Stockton. I think it's important. I think it's tangible. I think it's easy to explain. I'll talk more about it, but first, let's take some time to introduce the show. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Glad to have you with us, whether it's live on video 10 a.m. or on-demand video after the fact. Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really happy to have you as a part of our program today, and we certainly appreciate our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for being all a part of that with us here, too. Your source for Georgia divorce, and we talk about that all the time. And we love the fact that, I take a lot of pride in the growth that our partners show. And especially when it comes to like a long-range partner that's been with us for a very long time. And we continue to see that for our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Now, listen, divorce is obviously not it's a scary, confusing thing for so many people. It's a challenging conversation. But as I've told you, and I've been saying this for years and hope to say this for many years to come, for people who kind of find themselves in this challenging set of circumstances, I don't shy away from talking about the benefit that Merriweather and Tharp can provide to you, because one of my earnest, genuine beliefs is that people who are willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and get into it with you, the sort of messy part of life, oftentimes they're the most valuable and generous people you're ever going to find. And that's what Merriweather and Tharp is. And if you want to go back years ago, when we were kind of several studios ago, just sort of figuring all of this out, our friends at Merriweather and Tharp were willing to partner with us at the time. I'm so thankful for that. And back then, Merriweather and Tharp was a very successful organization serving people perhaps like you, kind of at the forefront of the divorce conversation. They were doing so in the Atlanta area. And now we've seen Meriwether and Tharp grow outside the boundaries of just our city here. And they're all across the state. That's why their website reflects that, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. And you've heard me talk before about, the office in Savannah or Peachtree City. But now for our friends over in Columbus. And I hear we have a lot of people in Columbus who are listening to us all the time over there in the west part of the state. And just the law of large numbers would suggest, statistics would indicate that, unfortunately, perhaps for you, but true nonetheless, a significant number of you are perhaps kind of looking at divorce as perhaps a next, unavoidable next step for you. And if that's your situation, our friends at Meriwether and Tharp want to help you there on that. And one of the ways which they can help you is they've gotten really creative about how they can provide you some cost certainty for what your divorce process might cost you, which is one of the biggest questions that people have. I want you to ask them specifically about their model M&T level of service and why, for a lot of people who are kind of thinking about this and perhaps feel like, yeah, this is just what I've got to do, or maybe the choice wasn't theirs, it was made by the other party in the situation. This model M&T level of service, I think, is providing a lot of comfort for a lot of people with one of the biggest sets of questions you might have, which is, how do I get some level of cost certainty out of all of this? So I love Meriwether and Tharp. I truly do. Bob's a good friend. His wife Ashley's a good friend of ours there as well. They're big Georgia fans. They're great people. They're closely connected to the Georgia program. You can give them a call and reach out to them by finding them online, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That is GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we have a special guest here today. Our guy, Terrence Edwards, normally joins us on Thursday. Terrence also head coach there at Mount Vernon. They got a lot going on. So Terrence is actually having to kind of pinch it and kind of get back in, do some position coaching again. He's the head coach, but he's going to be working closely with his wide receivers, he said today. So we're going to let him do that. And we'll look forward to catching up with him again, of course, very soon. Terrence, always so great, even in the midst of a busy schedule, to be a part of our program. Pinch hitting for him today, our guy Cody Chaffins. You see him each week on the beat. Last night you caught him on Before the Hedges, pinch hitting for Kaylee Manziel with Jeff Sintel, talking some UGA recruiting. We're going to get a chance to talk to Cody here live here today. And so that is going to be a lot of fun coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. We love having them as a part of all of that. And I want to transition from one preseason magazine to another. So I read from the Athlon preseason magazine a little earlier. I now have in my hand the Lindy's preseason magazine, and Lindy's been around for a good long while. They have their own version of the anonymous coach kind of quoted in the story here. And I kind of want to pick up with where the conversation just was a moment ago as we're around the Doghouse, presented by Daytona Beach here today. And what was said is that Kirby Smart has kind of laughed at some of the criticism of Gunnar Stockton in the face of Paul Feinbaum in kind of a humorous way. I think he would also laugh at this so-called anonymous coach who was like, can Gunnar Stockton be elite? In fact, some Georgia fans believe that Kirby Smart may be the one behind the scenes, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, sort of, doing all this behind the curtain as a way of getting out of his team what he wants to get out of it. But I also said a moment ago that I firmly believe there is kind of a specific and tangible reason why I don't think that Kirby Smart is nearly as worried about quarterback as maybe some in the media or some around college football perhaps think he should be, or maybe even want him to be, or I just don't think that Kirby Smart is necessarily playing along with that narrative. And I do think that what was written in the anonymous coach's quote blurb in the Lindy's magazine sheds more light on that. So once again, as I said before, I like these magazines. We're going to do some of this in our cruising around the SEC segment a lot over the course of not today, but over the next few days, of kind of what's being said about these other SEC teams, just because I think it's fun. I enjoy reading my magazines on a Royal Caribbean cruise as much as anything. So we're going to do that a little bit later on throughout the next few days. But also for now, I want to focus in on what Lindy's said about Georgia. And I do think it gives us a little bit more insight into the quarterback situation here too. So here's the full blurb. I want to focus in on one part of it though. The anonymous coach quoted at Lindy says, Georgia still has those NFL-looking bodies getting off the bus, but the portal has balanced the playing field. It's been a while since you felt you can take a shot at Georgia and just not get punched back in the face. Been there, done that. He says Kirby's still Kirby. He's pulling talent. Now listen to this. Look at Zachariah Branch out of USC. A big-time ad. Big-time game changer. Maybe, this coach says. The kid is special with the ball in his hands, so why didn't he blow up in the West Coast? It's a valid question, we would say, for sure. This anonymous coach goes on to say in the Lindy's magazine, if Kirby gets this kid to really play like a dog, like all the freaking time, then he's a major, major problem for the SEC. He goes on to also talk some more about the defense, but I think we're going to address some of that tomorrow. So in this blurb from the anonymous coach in the Lindy's magazine, the main part of the write-up is about Zachariah Branch and what he could be for the Georgia offense. And as I said when we were discussing this a few minutes ago, I think that skepticism about Georgia could potentially be valid. And I think that questions about a lot of this are possibly, valid as well, which is, how come he wasn't great at USC? We're going to talk more about, why that may or may not be here in a second. But I think the key takeaway, if you're a Georgia fan, is it is a legitimate concern of, well, how will my first-time starting quarterback play in his first full season as a starter? A guy with some experience in big-time games, postseason late last year, but still limited experience. How will he handle the rigors of a full, challenging season against the schedule that Georgia has to play? It's a legitimate question that in and of itself can't just be laughed off. But the reason why I think the confidence you see in Kirby is perhaps legitimate is because Kirby would perhaps say, while concerns about Gunner or any first-time starting quarterback are perhaps legitimate, we have taken steps to address those concerns. In other words, it's not the Matrix. You can't impart 3 years worth of game time experience into the back of Gunner Stockton's brain. You can't do that. But what you can do is give him more weapons to work with. And Georgia did give him Zachariah Branch, did give him Noah Thomas. As we mentioned a moment ago, go out and get an experienced running back from Illinois. You bring in elite talent from the 2025 high school class, the likes of Talon Taylor, C.J. Wiley, and others. That Georgia says, okay, maybe there is reason to have some concern if your quarterback's starting for the very first time. Our attempt to address that concern is by putting a lot of weapons around Gunner Stockton so that his job naturally just becomes a little easier. It'll always be hard to be a first-time starting quarterback. So what can we do to make it a little bit easier? How about bringing in a guy like Zachariah Branch, who this opposing coach, anonymous coach in Lindy says could be a huge problem for the SEC, but how come he wasn't always consistently great at USC? Fair question. I don't know that I have an easy and obvious answer to that because I don't live in LA. I'm not embedded to the USC program. That, to a degree, might be unknowable. And admittedly, it was on my mind when it was first announced that Zachariah and his brother Zion Branch were coming here of, boy, I saw him his first, couple of games of his college career back in 2023, looked amazing. How come it wasn't like that the rest of the way? And as I said, I can't completely answer that necessarily, but what I have learned about Zachariah Branch would lend me to believe that the optimistic appraisal of what he could be at Georgia is becoming a little bit more top of mind for me than the more skeptical inquisition of, well, why wasn't it always perfect there at USC? The truth is, a lot of this stuff is that's why guys transfer. That if it was perfect at their old spot, they'd still be there. So the fact that they're in the transfer portal suggests maybe they felt like they needed some sort of change of scenery. And, admittedly, sometimes when it comes to stuff like this, I guess I have a tendency to think, well, if you're a former five-star at USC, LA, kind of a glamorous Hollywood-style market, and I've told you all this before, trying to be candid, that maybe I had a sort of presupposition about what I thought Zachariah Branch might be coming here. And I don't think that's really true at all. I mean, at least based on the evidence that we have, the assumption I might would have made about a former elite recruit coming from sort of a Hollywood glamour program like USC, throwing big dollars around, almost a little bit more sizzle than steak sometimes. I guess I had some assumptions about Branch, but the truth is every indication we have from him thus far is that he is a really, really good fit, he and his brother Zion both, for the kind of sort of meat and potato stuff that Georgia wants you to be able to do. In fact, Kirby was very complimentary of both guys going back to the spring. Let me give you a reminder.
The Branch brothers have been a great kind of injection into our off-season energy and workouts. They love working out. You know, their father trains guys. They love training. So the culture and work ethic that it requires to be successful here, they've jumped right in and done a great job of that.
So the point is, anonymous coach says, well, how come it wasn't always great at USC? Honest truth, I don't know. But I trust Kirby Smart. I believe Kirby Smart. If Kirby Smart says, hey, they've got culture and work ethic, I'm going to take Kirby at his word on that. So whatever the reason was that Zachariah Branch wasn't always great at USC, whatever that reason was, it wasn't about his contribution to culture, and it wasn't about his commitment to work ethic, because Kirby Smart says he's got plenty of that. And that kind of stuff really matters to Kirby. So if Kirby's giving that compliment, he means it. So whatever the reason was that Zachariah wasn't consistent at USC, I'm going to trust it wasn't about his work ethic, and it wasn't about what kind of teammate he was, because Kirby's really praising him for that, along with his brother too. In fact, when we heard Zachariah speak himself during spring practice, we sort of saw the evidence of what Kirby Smart also says that he saw in him too. It was a really fun press conference, really, really insightful. Let me give you a taste of that if you've forgotten.
I wouldn't even say just how I play. I would just say my mentality. Every time I'm out there, I try to just be the best version of myself for the team. Try to go 100% effort, because you never know when your last play is. So, I just try to treat everything like a blessing. I get the opportunity to go out here every day and do something that I love. So, I just try to bring that fire and that passion into the sport that I try to bring to the receiver group.
So let me sum all of this up this way as we conclude around the Doghouse presented by Daytona Beach. Kirby Smart sounds confident in Gunnar Stockton. And I think some of that confidence comes from, if I had to guess, what Kirby knows he's got around Gunnar Stockton. Really impressive duo of receivers out of the transfer portal. Really good-looking crop of incoming freshmen. Veterans who've been here, who know the offense, who are ready for that next step. I think that Kirby's perhaps more confident around Gunnar Stockton with his Georgia offense than maybe some people perhaps realize. I do think that Zachariah Branch is maybe one of those guys that Kirby's got some pretty good confidence in. And we may never know for sure. Well, why wasn't, he the runaway dominant player at USC it once appeared that he was? We may never know that. I guess I'm, in a roundabout way, sort of glad he wasn't, because that gave him the open door to now come here to UGA, and maybe he fulfills and achieves that full potential here. The point is, I would take this anonymous coach seriously. When he says Zachariah Branch could be a problem for the rest of the SEC, I'd take him at his word. And if that turns out to be true, that speaks pretty well of what Gunnar Stockton will be able to do, and it speaks pretty well of what this Georgia offense will be able to do as well. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. I grew up going to Daytona Beach. I love Daytona Beach. I love talking about Daytona Beach here on this show because, A, I'm a big believer in vacations in general. I think you need one. And if you haven't planned your summer beach vacation yet this summer, I think you need to do that. I think it's just one of those things. It's just great to connect with the people in your life. And I don't think there's any better beach getaway you can have right now than with our friends at Daytona Beach. One of the reasons why is, there's an international airport that goes right to it. So if you're in the Atlanta area, you can go to the airport, you can hop on a flight, you can go straight to Daytona Beach, and you can enjoy all that Daytona Beach is famous for. Beautiful landmarks, Ponce Inlet Lighthouse, and all the fun outdoor stuff. I grew up going to the Main Street Pier and all the stuff around there. Unbelievable restaurants, all kinds of cuisine, obviously the seafood. But if you're interested in, just some of the, just all kinds of cuisine that's out there. You can enjoy that. You like to go fishing, you like to play golf, you like to go surfing. Obviously, it's known for motorsports, but there's a whole lot more than just that going on at Daytona Beach. So right now, it's a great time to learn all about this. Check out DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that. That is DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. We love having Daytona Beach as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. Now, before we are done on today's program, there is interesting insight in what it might look like in college football this year when it comes to the quarterback position. And there are some things being said about guys, including Arch Manning, but there's also something not being said about Arch Manning right now that I think could be interesting. Also, we have new details on a minor controversy that sort of loosely involves Georgia that we've talked about for the last couple of days. We've got new information on that. We'll give that to you before we're done today, too. So still busy, still plenty to do, and thrilled to bring on a really fun guest. In place of our normal Thursday spot with Terrence Edwards, let's talk to our terrific teammate, Cody Chaffins, here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, a couple of pieces of housekeeping just for a moment. We told you that Terrence couldn't be here. Obviously, summer workouts with his football team, the reason why. And, you know, you always wonder in the back of your mind, if a guy says something like that, is he really out fishing somewhere? Is he out playing golf somewhere? No, we do have photographic evidence here of good, hard workouts being done for Mount Vernon, the wonderful private school over there near our old home in Dunwoody. So we do have actual proof that Terrence Edwards is at work today. These football coaches, no joke. So for all the GHSA coaches, they have a dead week last week, and so they enjoyed a little time off. And this week, the grind begins. And, I mean, to be honest, this is one of the reasons why we love football is because, I mean, what better thing for these young men to be doing during the summer than in there working on their bodies and working on their minds? And, you know, these coaches give of their time. You know, there was a thing the other day about, and I'll get off my soapbox here in a second, but about how much money some of these coaches make in Georgia. And admittedly, Georgia does pay its coaches very well. I'm proud of that. I'm glad it does because I want the best coaches in our state. But when you start dividing that by the number of hours worked, all of a sudden that big high salary didn't quite seem quite as high anymore. And some of that stuff from Terrence Edwards there, an example of that. So Terrence is busy. Cody Chaffins is always busy too, but he's kind enough to join us from the control room here for a moment. First of all, Cody, let me just say thank you so much for being a part of our show. And before we get into all the other stuff, I don't know if we have the capability to do this, but we had the really fun sort of over-my-shoulder graphic to begin the show of the kind of our own rendition of the anonymous coach. I'm assuming that you put that together, you and our guy Jay Black working today. I think this is really clever. I love the darkened face. As I said before, this kind of gives you a little bit of a 60 Minutes vibe, some sort of whistleblower or something like that. I feel like a very, I guess, distinguished newsman in a situation like that. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you could tell. So that the picture we just showed, I'll pull up a different one here as I'm sitting in the control room.
So it's a coach who wears a hat. You can obviously
It's a coach who wears a hat. All right, so this one's a little darker. I had to do it a few times because he needed to get a little darker. It is a Southeastern Conference coach. I will give you that. And so I was just picking at random because, again, this not to say this person was saying anything about Georgia or not.
Right.
But I needed a guy with a headset who looked like a coach. And this just looks like a coach to me. But I'll give you, it's a Southeastern Conference head coach, if you know.
So it's a fuller face, I feel like. Now, obviously,
Yes.
You're listening podcast, you can't see this, but what we're showing is the darkened image here. This is not the anonymous coach from the magazine, but it is sort of our rendition of what an anonymous coach might look like. Think about this like one of those like sort of courtroom drawing type things, maybe. It's a fuller face. It's a hat. Like there's a part of me, like he's not active in the SEC anymore, but there's a part of me that almost wants to go like a Todd Grantham type thing with the face.
Yeah, I could see it.
But I guess Grantham didn't wear hats. I think his head was
And
too.
the team he's facing just converted a 3rd and long. Is that
Yeah, you're right. I think his head was too big for a hat. Boy, I mean, I could almost say like an Austin Armstrong from Florida here. I also don't think he necessarily wore a hat, but the kind of fuller face makes me feel that way.
Yeah,
I guess go ahead and.
This is the head coach.
Okay, so go ahead
Current
and
head coach.
So go ahead and reveal the mystery here.
All right, so I'll show you the other picture. You could almost see on his shoulder here the gig'em. It is Mike Elko from
Okay,
Texas A&M.
yeah.
He just looks like a football coach. So,
well, I would also say that Elko is also anonymous, even if you took the shadow off it. Like, we live in a time in which most SEC coaches are among the most famous people in our region, but there are a couple, like, I mean, we talk about Elko a decent amount. I honestly don't think I know what Elko looks like. So even if you revealed the face, I'm not quite so sure I would fully recognize him. He's a good coach, former DC, had success at Duke, but that's sort of an anonymous coach in real life, I would say.
Yeah, I think the guy, Jeff Lebby at
yes,
Mississippi
Lebby's
State, they
the
could be in the restaurant and you would have no idea. SEC Media Days last year, I'm like, am I shooting the right guy?
Yeah, no.
I mean, this could just be the radio guy from, Tuscaloosa, and I wouldn't know. And so, both of those coaches are pretty anonymous.
So we talked a little earlier about Zachariah Branch, and you've covered stuff like this for a long time. And I think it's only natural, I'm not trying to be honest about this, is that when you're introduced to a player for the first time, that you have some sort of impression of what you think that player is going to be like. And I will tell you, and perhaps this is my own fault, and I'm sure it probably is, I sort of had some assumptions about Zachariah Branch. We just talked about this before he got to Georgia. This is the LA guy, the former 5-star. There's some sort of, we just sometimes sort of think of receivers being sort of prima donna-ish. Perhaps we think about that too much. Maybe that's too much of a cliche. I would certainly be open to that criticism, but I probably sort of thought, Branch is coming here. Is motivation going to be a concern because of what you sort of think of sometimes about the sort of, glitzy, glamoury LA, USC program? We have sort of presuppositions about that. Well, I couldn't be more wrong about Zachariah Branch because Kirby wouldn't make the compliments he makes of him and his brother Zion unless he really believed it, because the sorts of things that Kirby is saying, we know those to be Kirby's essentially most closely held beliefs. And Branch himself, when he spoke, really I thought spoke in a very, just a very sort of heartfelt way in a lot of ways. So I think one of the reasons why Kirby Smart is perhaps more confident in the Georgia offense than some people have kind of assumed that he might be is because I do think he likes the mental makeup of the players that he's brought in. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. You played the clip from Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart didn't have to answer that question the way he did. He chose to bring in his work ethic and how hard he's working. Kirby could have said, this guy's got a ton of skills. We can't wait to see what he does on the field. He could have danced around that. Kirby is not going to give, like you said, he's not going to give that compliment to somebody who is undeserving of that compliment. So I think that tells you a lot right there. It was so interesting to me to hear that his dad, Zion and Zachariah Branch's dad, is also a trainer. So my mind immediately goes to like DeAndre Swift or Kendall Milton's dad. I don't know if his dad is the Branch dad is jacked like that, but I can't wait to see him if he shows up on the screen. And the other question you had was, why wasn't he doing it at Southern Cal? He was a first-team All-American as a freshman, and then last year had a sophomore slump. And the big question that the guy in the Lindy's book wrote, is what's going on with that? Can Kirby get him to act like a dog? Well, one thing we know about Kirby Smart, he will call you out if you are not working the way you should be working. Was motivation a factor under Lincoln Riley at Southern Cal? I know we all have our thoughts on what kind of coach Lincoln Riley is, so maybe that was something out there. But I think what he brings to this Georgia offense that's going to be so great. So many Dog fans and so many folks that are critical of the Georgia offense hate the Mike Bobo screen pass. We saw him throw it a couple of times in the G-Day game to Zachariah Branch. This is a guy who can make you miss in a phone booth. This is a guy who's going to get that ball and make the first man miss. That's one of those things in all of those screen passes, which Kirby Smart will tell you is an extension of the run game. You got to make at least one man miss to make that look like a decent play, and this is a guy who can do that. He's shown the wiggle, returned 2 kickoffs for touchdowns as a freshman at Southern Cal. We could also love to see what he can bring on special teams because, boy, it's been a while since we had a real threat back there. I think back to the human joystick in 2016. So he can do that kind of thing. He's also a guy who can run past you, so you can't come up, and he's not a huge guy, so you can't just jam him at the line because if he gets past you, he's gone. It can be a deep threat. We saw a deep ball on G-Day as well.
Yeah, so I kind of operate on a lot of things being kind of 50-50 propositions. Anonymous coach in Lindy says, hey, will he be a dog at Georgia and a problem with the rest of the SEC, or will he be more like the guy he was at USC? I'll confess, I don't really know. It's probably a little bit of a coin flip. I'd say the same thing about Noah Thomas, too, who was pretty good for a meager offense a year ago, could be better here at Georgia. But it's almost like, okay, well, let's say one of them really pops, one of them doesn't. Incoming freshman, you think, well, CJ Wiley could be an immediate impact player. Maybe Talon Taylor could too. Perhaps they both will, but let's say one of them does, one of them doesn't. To me, that's sort of the recipe for the Georgia offense here. Can you find one of these two transfers that has, a big season? Of your incoming freshmen, can you kind of find one that's the immediate impact? Can you pair them with, of the guys who've been on the roster who could take the next step? Some of them probably will, some of them probably won't. That in the midst of all of this, that's how you sort of cobble together an offense. And none of it's guaranteed, but I do, Cody, see the potential for enough building blocks where I don't think it's that hard for Georgia to get to where it needs to go offensively. It does need to be better than it was a year ago. Full stop, without equivocation, I will tell you that. I just don't think it's that hard to get there when you look at the pieces that could materialize for Georgia.
Yeah, I think we all wish we could just say it's going to be this guy this year. But the one thing Georgia has done is just thrown numbers at the problem. And you mentioned Noah Thomas, Zachariah Branch, those guys coming in off the transfer portal. Don't forget, Colby Young is an addition to this offense as well. Mm-hmm. We didn't see him for most of the year last year. So you got 3 new receivers in there, really, plus the guys like the 5-star Talon Taylor and CJ Wiley. We'll see what they can contribute as a freshman. I don't really have very high expectations for those guys. And the thing about this wide receiver group, Dylan Bell's now in his 3rd year. Drops were an issue for him. Drops were an issue for, 36 drops on that wide receiver group. It's going to be hard to drop it 36 times this year. Knock on wood, it doesn't happen, but it would be hard to duplicate something like that. Something's gone terribly wrong if that happens again. So you just throw numbers at the problem. A lot of guys who can be playmakers, not to mention your tight ends as pass catchers, not to mention, guys coming out of the backfield as pass catchers as well. So you throw the numbers. You're not going to know exactly who it's going to be right now. We can't say it's Noah Thomas's year to have 8 or 9 or 10 touchdowns this year. We don't know that right now, but we know there's a crop of guys out there who Georgia has brought in who have talent, and one of those guys can pop. And the nice thing about the schedule, the way it sets up, you start with Marshall and Austin Peay. You got 2 weeks there to build momentum, to build confidence. Confidence is something that this wide receiver group and any wide receiver has to have, and confidence from their quarterback, Gunnar Stockton, who we've talked about earlier on the show as well. This is a chance for those guys to do it in game situations, build that confidence as they get ready to head on the road to Knoxville.
I want to finish with a question about Georgia recruiting because I know last night you were with Jeff on Before the Hedges. But before that, let me squeeze in one more thing. Your background, a lot more of a reporter than I am. I've never really been a reporter. Don't think of myself certainly as one of those now. I just sort of sit here and talk to people. And when we talk here, we're talking about the other hot takes that exist out there. And it does seem like some of the anonymous coach stuff we read today kind of fits into what I think has been a little bit of a theme of people are sort of workshopping some takes about some skepticism of Georgia. I think some of this is just sort of natural to want to kind of find a big brand, big team and say, I'm not quite so sure they're going to be very good, because that is just a more interesting take than saying that about a team that people feel like they know a little bit less about. And obviously around here we have kind of I would say, a pretty strong reaction when some of that skepticism exists. What do you think about the mood around Georgia right now? This is talking season. All we have right now is talk. None of this is tangible, and a lot of this is potentially not even real. But what do you kind of make about the mood around Georgia before the fall camp begins and then the season begins just after that?
I think it kind of all infiltrates from other people, right? The first guy has to say, Georgia, they lost to Notre Dame. They're not playing in the semifinals. Boy, that's got to be disappointing. There's something wrong there. And then they try to find reasons why things could be wrong. Well, let's not forget, what happened throughout the injuries we saw last year and some of the wide receivers who weren't even there who we thought were going to be there. It was a whole different kind of year for Georgia, but that's not as fun to talk about. So the first guy goes in and says, okay, what's obvious? What can I say? Well, the quarterback's new, so it's an unproven quarterback. We'll go with that. Yeah. And then the next guy says, all right, I have to go on this show and talk about Georgia. Let me read what everybody else is saying about, okay, they're all saying the quarterback is a question mark, so I'm going to go with that. And so I think it all kind of it's kind of this group think that goes around, and it is much more fun to talk about Georgia falling off. That's going to get more clicks than, Kirby Smart, incredibly consistent, and he's probably going to have his team ready to play one more time. That's boring. So it's been much more fun to follow Alabama after Nick Saban and what's it going to be, and we can draw these big conclusions. I think that's the kind of thing that people want to do for Georgia too, whether they're just kind of hoping or they're just looking for something different to say than they've had to say the last few years.
So real quick, I know you were with Jeff last night before the hedges. We'll talk to Jeff on the show tomorrow. I thought the Justice Fitzpatrick news this week was pretty big. It kind of caught me off guard a little bit, I will admit that. But, SEC legacy, obviously Minkah Fitzpatrick was a great player at Alabama. Justice is a very highly rated player from an incredibly talent-rich program. I think some Georgia fans sometimes are kind of trying to find their footing on a story that sort of felt like, to me, it kind of felt like it came out of nowhere a little bit. So some Georgia fans kind of trying to figure out, okay, exactly what's going on here. But, just basic appraisal. For a Georgia team that probably needed some defensive back wins in this 2026 class, my gosh, a guy like Fitzpatrick, if that were to stick, that's a pretty big one, I think.
Yeah, top 50 recruit. He's the second guy behind Jared Curtis now that you've gotten. And you talked about yesterday on the show really deeply that the relationship with Kirby and Minkah. So the thing we heard from Justice Fitzpatrick, his big quote after all this is, I want to go to war with Georgia. And a guy that's thinking like that and who has a brother who knows what it's like to play for Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, who's just in that mentality, you know what? Bloody Tuesday ain't going to come as a surprise to a guy like that. And that's what you want to hear. He's, an incredible cornerback, but according to Jeff, it's been on Jeff's radar for a while now. They've been saying this name, if you watch Before the Hedges, for a while now. So it's not a surprise to those folks who watch Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. But he's a cornerback. Could he play some more safety? That's a possibility as well. But Georgia, this defensive secondary has really been building over the last month as they've gathered commitments there. So really exciting to see. You see the ball skills right there as he pulls it down, but he's not a small guy at all. So I think he's definitely somebody who could contribute other places if he's not going to be a cornerback his freshman year. They just need to get him on the field. We remember Minkah playing star, so could he be a guy who contributes other places as well? You just want a guy like this who has the makeup and who has the genes of a 5-time Pro Bowler. Yeah, no doubt. Really good stuff. Cody, thanks for your time today. We love what you're doing here at Dawg Nation, of course, every Monday night with Mike on the beat, but also all kinds of contributions to shows up and down the roster, including later on this afternoon, later on this evening, of course, a part of Dawg Nation at large as well. So we'll see you there for that this evening, Monday too, and all around Dawg Nation, plenty over the course of the rest of the summer. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so Cody talking about that, kind of the mood around Georgia. We said this. How do you feel about 7-5 and 25? We tried to go for 2 and 22. To be honest, one of our greatest hits. If we had a greatest hits album from our 10 years of doing this, it spawned multiple T-shirts, a lot of merch. One of our greatest hits for go for 2 and 22. Go for 3 and 23, like a lot of sequels, probably left a little something to be desired. We got close to the finish line, just didn't get quite over the hump there. I loved our logo for go for 3 and 23, but the end result didn't quite work out, and people were sort of done with the go fors after that. 7-5 and 25. And by the way, hashtags aren't really a thing anymore. Have you noticed this? That when we did go for 2 and 22, it was kind of a hashtag because back then hashtags were a thing. I don't think the internet really works with hashtags as much anymore. But 7-5 and 25, maybe we'll consider that a little bit. One thing I know we'll consider, and one thing I do hope that we're going for here in 2025, is a chance to be a part of a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. We were talking, yesterday a little bit about, hey, what's the rest of summer look like? What's going on? And I was saying, well, listen, if I have a chance to get on board Star of the Seas, even if it's just a short one, I want my chance to do it because I joke about this, but in all seriousness, I do want to be able to tell all of you about how exciting this is. And as we're sitting here in the month of June, the ship has essentially been completed. It's a brand new ship. It'll be the newest Royal Caribbean cruise ship when it sails in August. It's essentially been completed. It's in Finland there, and where the shipyard is. And first of all, it's just amazing that humans can construct something so large. It just boggles the mind, really. And you've got thousands of people kind of going through this now, and they're kind of testing everything. I'm talking about like the main stuff from the ship, but also the fun stuff on the interior. And there'll be so many things about Star of the Seas that'll be similar to what Icon of the Seas was, and in other cases it'll be something different than maybe Icon had, because Royal Caribbean always likes the idea of sort of introducing new things with every single one of these ships that sort of hits the fleet. So it's an exciting time, and honestly, it's a great time for you to talk to Jessica Slater about how you can be a part of a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, Star of the Seas in particular. And I always want you thinking kind of long range on stuff like this. So if you're thinking, hey, maybe next summer I want to be on a ship like this, this is the time to be booking your cruise travel for next summer. You almost always get a better price the sooner you book. That means you start thinking long range on this. You get sort of just better selection of staterooms, things like that. I want you to think of, when you might in the next year, in some cases even 2 years, when you might be looking at a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Planning far ahead oftentimes is the best way to do that. And a great travel advisor like Jessica Slater is a great example of who can help you with this. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She knows the product line. She knows the ships. She knows all the itineraries. She can give you everything you need when it comes to a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. All right, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC here right now. So I saw where CBS Sports has a new mock draft up for the 2026 NFL draft. And a couple of things were interesting for me about this. Thing number one is there were 4 quarterbacks selected, according to this CBS mock draft. 4 quarterbacks selected in the first round of next year's NFL draft, according to some rando at CBS, which, listen, I like the content. I'm not mad that it's put out there. A name that was not on this list, though, was Arch Manning. It is the opinion of CBS Sports right now, perhaps, that Manning, while he would be draft eligible after this upcoming college football season, will not be going to the NFL draft, would perhaps come back to college for one more year in 2027. Now, wouldn't that be interesting? And this is right now just a mock draft. By the way, mock drafts are notoriously wrong early. They get more correct as you get closer to the action. But a lot of as we said before, we're kind of in the hot take season for college football. 1 year ahead of an NFL draft is also sort of fertile soil for kind of hottish takes there that end up not oftentimes being true. So a lot of this could change. But wouldn't it be interesting for Texas if we are talking about Arch Manning as a 2-year proposition? What that would tell me, if that turns out to be true, is that while Manning, I do firmly believe, is probably good, those who hope he falls flat on his face because of whatever reason they're going to come up with, I don't think they're going to get their wish on that. But if Manning is already, if there's some educated guessing, well, maybe he won't leave after this year, then maybe there's also room for some educated guessing. Maybe Manning isn't exactly great right now, because I don't care how much money you could make in college football from NIL, and there's no telling how much money he would be eligible to make. No matter how much money you could make, if you could be the number 1 overall pick, you probably still want to do that, unless it's some sort of team you don't want to play for. And obviously, his uncle Eli, didn't he sort of famously kind of orchestrate a thing with like the Chargers and the Giants? So like they're no strangers to sort of, having some concern about whichever NFL team they might play for. Maybe Arch could potentially have that for whoever drafts number 1 overall in 2026. Maybe that's the case. But in most situations, in most times, if you could be 1-1, the number 1 overall pick, that's what you probably want to be. So if Manning is, maybe if there's chatter he might come back in 2027, then some of the high-end projections for Arch's performance this year, then maybe they're not necessarily going to come true. If you're interested in who the 4 quarterbacks who are mocked into the first round right now, you got Lenoris Sellers from South Carolina. You got Fernando Mendoza leaves Cal to go to Indiana. He shows up in there. You've got Drew Allar, the quarterback from Penn State. And I believe he's in the mock draft, and I think he may be going number 1 overall, is Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. And I guess the other small point I'll make here is, if this is true, if these are first-round quarterbacks, South Carolina has playoff aspirations. LSU has playoff aspirations. Penn State's going to be among the national championship favorites. Indiana, probably the outlier. We don't think they're going to repeat as a playoff team this year. Last year, I don't think was really the year of the quarterback around college football. Ohio State, as we said, won the national championship. They had kind of a late round draft pick as their starter. He was not the best player on the team. Texas, makes a deep run. Quinn Ewers did not have a great season. Notre Dame had Riley Leonard, but Leonard was not among the best quarterbacks, in college, not a super elite high level NFL prospect. When you look at the top teams in college football a year ago, Dylan Gabriel, I think people have a lot of questions about him after leaving Oregon, what he might be able to do at the NFL level. Last year, when you look at the top teams in college football, not exactly the year of the quarterback around the sport. The best teams did not have elite level quarterback play for the most part. They had capable contributors, but not necessarily elite play. Well, this year, at least 3 of the 4 early mocked first-round quarterbacks are teams that do have playoff aspirations. So I do think one of the things that'll be worth paying attention to is how much quarterback play is closely connected to team success. A year ago, not super much so. This year, maybe different. By the way, speaking of the college football playoff, we have debate continuing to rage when it comes about what the future of what's almost certainly going to be an expanded playoff, what it's going to look like. One of the things that's come up, and Greg Sankey has spoken about this, is about what might happen when it comes to reseeding, meaning that, hey, you're seeded this way after the first round, 1 through 16, so-and-so beat so-and-so, do you then reseed again? Sankey says, no, not really. He says because almost, a week and a half ago for the 2025 season, the College Football Playoff Committee, he says they agreed to go to just a straight seeding by ranking. So the movement of teams outside the top 4 into the top 4, that won't happen anymore in 2025. You're going to get what you earn, same for home games. So basically, they have agreed to go away from what happened a year ago where the conference champions kind of got bumped up from a seeding standpoint into the bye round, into the quarterfinals. Sankey says we're going with straight seeding for how you make the playoff, and I guess keeping a straight seeding model in place after that too. No reseeding after the first round, which I'm always kind of in favor of. I don't like the idea of reseeding things because I just think anything that needlessly complicates things from a fan standpoint, I think even if it's to a small degree, diminishes fan interest. People kind of like knowing how the bracket sets up. For whatever reason, we didn't have a lot of people kind of filling out mock brackets a year ago. Maybe if you move to a 16-team playoff, they will. We haven't really had a lot of that yet, the way we do for the NCAA basketball tournament, for instance, although if you give Greg Sankey his way, he may ruin that too. I say kiddingly, somewhat. But the point is we didn't see a lot of brackets being filled out for college football a year ago, but I like the idea that you could fill out a bracket with some certainty what it might look like. You also had Joey McGuire, the Texas Tech coach, another country heard from here, talking about how the bias needs to be removed from this, process of how many Big 12 teams get in, how many SEC teams get in. And I would say, too, McGuire all of a sudden feels emboldened because I guess he's got a bunch of NIL dollars behind him here this year. I would say that you are never going to remove the bias for this. You're just not. That everyone's always going to argue what's in their own best interest. I think the SEC was a little slow in doing that for a while. The fact that they're forceful about that, I take it's kind of a good thing. You've also got that coming now from the Big Ten too, where I guess Ryan Day is out there saying we now have battle lines drawn. The SEC wants at-larges, hey, put the best teams in, assuming that the committee is capable of selecting that. Ryan Day and a lot of the Big Ten coaches, they want the automatic qualifiers. They want their schedules protected. They want their path as easy as possible, at least in my eyes. They want the automatic qualifiers. Day says we should get at least 4 automatic qualifiers, which obviously I think is laughable. But I think oftentimes from the people in the Big Ten, you see arguing as it should be done. And listen, I think the truth matters. I'm not a believer in relativism and things like that. But this is arguing 101, is that when you say we should have at least 4 automatic bids, what you're really trying to say is we think we should deserve more than that. So therefore, 4 would represent a compromise, which is, as many as they're probably ever going to get. But by getting 4, we're calling that sort of a compromise position. I think this is an example of how successful arguing is done. And frankly, I think the SEC has been a little slow to the argument on this. but it's good to see them more forceful about that now. Finally, and I'll be brief about this, speaking of arguing, we have talked a lot about the aftermath of the NCAA regionals, and obviously Georgia disappointingly exits from that. There was the controversy involving Florida, and the guy who sort of waded face deep into all of this has been Chipper Jones, who was like critical of some of the way in which the SEC teams went about its business in college football and was not very specific about who he was talking about. You know, a lot of people in his mentions, as we said yesterday, Georgia fans, Tennessee fans, some Florida fans are like, wait, is he talking about us? Is this about us? Well, Chipper in the last 24 hours has clarified his remarks on this a little bit. I just want to read this briefly, then we're going to put this story to bed. We've talked about this like 4 days now. He says, there's a lot of speculation on who I was speaking about in my post last night. So let's get this out of the way. I was disappointed in how Florida coach Sully handled the situation at the end of the game against Coastal Carolina. He goes on to say, I also was sitting with my UG alum friend watching the Dogs against Oklahoma State. He says, the uniforms were a mess. Taunting, bat flipping, trash talking, although he uses a different word. He goes, it was all above and beyond normal. He says, my friend who played baseball at Georgia also agree. And then he also mentions a Florida State pitcher who told a Mississippi State hitter to sit the you-know-what down, and apparently got a lot more colorful than that. So Chipper Jones has provided some clarity about who it was he was criticizing. What's interesting is he doesn't mention Tennessee by name here, although, listen, you know, I think there's room to criticize Georgia. As I said before, I would prefer you button your jersey up. You know, I don't know about bat flipping towards the other team's dugout. I'm a little bit more of a traditionalist. But if you're going to criticize Georgia, you got to criticize Tennessee because they're even worse with all that kind of stuff. In fact, you know, their nonsense is never ending. So, but anyway, Chipper, who we love, taking a little bit of a jab at Georgia, perhaps taking it a little too far, but at the same time, Chipper's a Hall of Famer. He's earned the right to say what he wants to. And so for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up here today, we will give you a golden shoe. So yesterday, I talked about one of our sponsors, Breda Pest Management. We love having our friends at Meriwether and Thorpe today. Breda Pest Management, we love having them too. I talked about a dream I had where I'd just kind of forgotten to do the sponsor read, the same way that maybe you kind of forget some. We have these dreams sometimes, and I had a dream about just sort of forgetting to do one of our sponsor reads. And as I joked with you yesterday, just goes to show you that even in my dreams, I live sort of a boring life, I guess. I'm thinking about sponsor reads in my dream. But nonetheless, I talked about that yesterday. And so in honor of that, very funny Billy Ray on X writes in, he says, BA, you didn't forget to do the Breda Pest Management read on the show. I wonder if you might be forgetting something else. Yes, indeed. Every now and then you kind of do that. Now, what Billy's actually referencing is our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge winners are going to get a chance to come live on the show. I promise that's on the way, but very funny stuff from Billy. Also, those stickers, they're going in the mail too. I'm working on those today. In fact, that's my next task as soon as the show is done. So we got some really, really fun stuff coming. We're happy to have you with us. We certainly appreciate Billy Ray for being our Golden Shoe winner. How about lousy, stinking Gators? 1,671 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Thorpe. And luckily, as I say, and on video, I can say I did not forget to mention our friends at Meriwether and Thorpe, nor do I forget to mention our friends at R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price promised. You can trust them on all of that. By the way, on YouTube, Breda Pest Management says, BA dreams about bugs. Yes, indeed. Keeping those bugs outside of my house, certainly a very important thing to be able to do. I do think about that. By the way, you ever watch those videos?
Hey, BA, will you tell Braid is actually scheduled to come to my house tomorrow. Will you just let them know I can confirm 4 o'clock?
All right, yeah. So Cody confirming with Matt 4 o'clock tomorrow. Brady coming out to his house. So there you go. That's how it works. They're out there taking care of people all the time, and you certainly love all of that. That's good stuff. So Cody confirming they're live on the air, which is really fun.
Jay Black here. Can I start the cool down with a question?
Please, by all means.
Well, we're talking about Chipper. So, you know how many home runs like all 12 of the Braves left fielders have hit this year?
I'm guessing it's a very low single-digit-ish total, I'm guessing.
It is 1.
Oh, that's not good.
Can 53-year-old Chipper Jones in 60 games hit more than 1 home run?
I believe he probably could. Yes, I do. I believe he probably could. That's one of the reasons why people talk about moving the young catcher out to the outfield. It's just because left field's been just a barren wasteland. And I remember saying this at the time about Chipper. Like when he retired, he was still playing at a high level. Now, obviously, that was a good number of years ago now. But when he retired, he was still playing at a high level. And I remember thinking, he just shouldn't retire. Like, to me, if you are capable of playing Major League Baseball, you probably should. There's one of those things where, like, if you've got the aptitude to be a physician, you probably should be one. And if you could be, an engineer or something like that, some high-level person, you probably should do that, right? You should probably achieve to your highest aptitude. Just one of those things that, if that potential exists within you, you probably need to do it. And in the case of Major League Baseball, I would say that it is a mistake to walk away from the game when you are still capable of playing. People don't like the idea of, what's the example people always cite of, like, Willie Mays in the New York Mets outfield, or whatever example of, like, the player who's clearly past his prime out there. As I've told you before, I don't think age is a scandal. I don't think it is. People are, as you get older, you are just less than yourself. That happens. I don't think people should be afraid of that. And I felt like when Chipper walked away from the game, I felt like he was playing at a high enough level that retiring was a mistake. I do. I thought retiring was a mistake. I don't know, obviously, how he felt about that. If he ever regretted making the decision, I'm guessing he probably didn't. But I do believe that if you're still capable of playing Major League Baseball, I think you owe it to yourself to keep playing. Let us see what else. D. Nelly bringing up a good point. So, this is one of the things where, not everybody loves analytics, things like that, but it does make proving things, assuming we believe the stuff, a little easier than it used to. And one of the things you're hearing a lot lately is, and I promise this won't be a baseball show, y'all, I promise, but it has been measured. There is more drag on the baseball. The baseballs are not traveling as far as they used to. And if that's true, for a home run kind of centric team like the Braves, you would assume that would probably have an impact on them. Like when I was a kid, I'm pretty sure this is true. Like we definitely had years when there were way more home runs in some years than others. That was definitely true. And back then, I think the balls were hand stitched. They have not been hand stitched in a long time. But I do believe when I was a kid, I think this is true, the balls were hand stitched. And supposedly in some years, they were just wound tighter than the others. Like 87, for instance. You look at the home run totals in 86 compared to 87, way more home runs in 87 there had been the previous year, and way more home runs than there were the following year. It was kind of a juiced baseball year. We definitely had juiced baseball years when I was a kid, and the home run totals were dramatically different. Apparently, we were in a non-juiced baseball year this year. Foster Moss asking about Diddy. So here's what I can tell you. Thankfully, there are some things I'm very thankful for. I don't know much about the Diddy saga. I really don't. I'm not even, I have a general idea of what it's about. I'm not even 100% sure what he's charged with. I do know he's in court. I know that it's in New York. New York doesn't allow cameras in the courtroom. Do know that. I do know that some of the allegations around this are heinous. I understand all of that. But specifically, I am not a huge participant in celebrity culture. I like movies and stuff like that. I like to watch, content. But I am not a huge participant in celebrity culture. So while I am aware that Diddy has had a fall from grace, I am not even all that well versed in the trial. Although I do like courtroom stuff. I do enjoy that, but I'm not super into the Diddy thing. Chef J. Bowen says, could we do a baseball show close to the College World Series? So I will tell you this. How we do the post-game show for like Georgia football games? In 2019, I think it was, I decided I'm going to do a post-game show for the NCAA Regional. I'm going to do a post-game show. The problem is that I love baseball. I spend a lot of my time away from the show this time of year. I'm watching baseball. Baseball is a thing I like to consume, especially this time of year. The interest in it from a mass market standpoint for our audience so much lower that, there really wasn't much audience for doing the post-game show. Plus Georgia got basically knocked out of the regional as quickly as it started. That didn't help things either. I was thinking the other day, though, because we've been around enough now, and frankly, not to be immodest, but we deliver enough numbers that maybe we'll just do a show even if nobody watches it, like 9, and maybe we'll even do a separate channel or something like that. I don't know. Just sort of keep the average high on the regular channel. But maybe we'll just do a baseball show one day, even if like 7 people watch it, just for the people who want to. Foster Moss said I had to cancel and get credit for my ticket to Omaha. I'll tell you this, talking about going to Omaha. Like, my son is a gigantic baseball fan, and he was hitting me up every day about, Daddy, can we go to Omaha? Can we go to Omaha? Can we go to Omaha? He sounded like Peyton Manning. It's Omaha left and right. So he was all about it. He's like, even if we just go for one day, can we just go for one day? So he was all about it. So I don't know what would have happened had Georgia advanced, but I can promise you this: he was not going to let up about that. He really wanted to go. Chef J. Bowen says also with the conspiracy theories with BA, that may be on what do they call it, like a Substack or something like that. We may do that on one of those one of these days. One of these days anyway. Let's see what else. Clint, I should say, Sinhot Atlanta also pointing out that 1987 was the year the Braves rolled out the new current uniforms, acquired Smoltzy for Doyle Alexander. It was a great year in baseball history. Yeah. I mean, first of all, 87 tops, the wood border. Oh my gosh. Now they may have printed 1 billion of those cards. Like, honestly, I think you could solve the housing crisis just by using those, the cardboard from those to do like some prefab homes or something like that. I mean, they printed so many of those. There's not a single one that's worth even a dime. I love 87 tops. Like I was the biggest baseball fan in the world in 87. World Series was the Twins and Cardinals. That was a fun World Series. That's kind of when I got into Sports Center for the first time. This is it's not necessarily early days of Sports Center, but it was pre the 90s Sports Center that became super famous. This was pre that. I remember in the summer that year, just watching Sports Center every night, watching Major League Baseball highlights. This is back when Sports Center would have been Berman, Charlie Steiner, I think, John Saunders, I believe. Big baseball, like 1987, big baseball fan. Wow, big baseball fan at 87. Yeah, there's an 87 top. Is that Tony Gwynn? I bet you I have, and actually I still have a lot of these. I bet you I have 100 copies of this card, or so certainly something that feels that way. By the way, that one's nice mint condition too. Even in Gem Mint 10, that thing's not worth 12 cents. But that is a gorgeous baseball card. It's just a gorgeous baseball card. I just love that. And everybody sort of thinks the baseball cards from their era are gorgeous. But you get into the 90s, like some of those baseball designs are terrible, awful. They're hideous. And that's my era too. But that was good, fun times right there. That's a good, I mean, that's back when a pack, you got 15 cards for 50 cents. That was awesome. Let's see what else. Chef J. Bowen says, I remember going to my first Braves game in 1988 with my grandfather. He took me to the varsity in Atlanta. I remember seeing all the Braves memorabilia. So cool. Yeah, my grandfather also took me to my first Braves game. I only barely remember that. My parents would mostly take me. And that's one of those things, like we grew up in Hall County, and we didn't come to Atlanta very much. We just didn't. But we would come for Braves games. And that's one of the reasons why always a big Braves fan. And their Braves were terrible back then. So, like, when I was in the 8th grade going into, like, say, high school, Braves became really good. But as a child, Braves were terrible. We still came to games. You kind of look back on that. Why did we do this? The only thing we came to Atlanta for. Came, I'd say, semi-regularly for a team that was losing 100 games. I mean, you could just rubber stamp 100 losses. But we still came, and I loved it. Looking back, you wonder, why did we do that so much? Like why that? We didn't go to the zoo. We didn't, go see the Falcons. We didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, we'd go to the zoo every now and then, but it's not like we were just like bebopping to Atlanta on a regular basis. Most people from Hall County weren't. But we go to Braves games pretty regularly at the old Fulton County Stadium, which was 2 stadiums ago. When you start measuring your life and the number of stadiums you've seen come and go, that's tough. That's tough. Brady Pass manager, the Pirates manager who always smoked in the dugout was Jim Leland. Leland was a smoker. A very good manager. Went on to win World Series in Miami with the Florida Marlins, as they were known at the time. Had success in Detroit. A smoker. And, to give a free ad away, when we did come to Atlanta, we would always go to the Varsity. Like, that's really who eats at the Varsity. It's the people who rarely come to Atlanta, who, you're going to the Braves game. Now the Varsity's not, near the stadium, or the stadium's not near the Varsity, I should say. But you kind of go do that. It's kind of funny. Like, I haven't been to, like, the downtown Atlanta Varsity in forever. But I do go to the one, out in the country a little bit. I do go to that one sometimes. All right. Let me, Brady says he goes to the one that finally opened in Watkinsville. Yeah, so I saw the sign for that. I don't think I've actually seen that. I go to the one in Bethlehem sometimes. Is it a Rockets? Is that how he says it? See, the sports pictures and arenas look differently in the 70s and 80s due to all the cigarette smoke in the air. Yeah, I mean, obviously sometimes you see the movies where it has like a bunch of cigarette smoke in the air. Like, as someone who, not 70s, but definitely I remember the 80s. Like, I remember like smoking sections in restaurants. I want to say even into the 2000s, like Mississippi, I want to say still had smoking sections. I remember going to a place in like Mississippi, early 2000s-ish, and early 2000s, and they said, "Do you want smoking or non-smoking?" That's the last time I was ever asked that. All right, let me get a couple DawgNation.coms here for a second. Senior Dog 54 says, "Have you ever considered doing a show of nothing but viewer comments?" I have thought about that. Like, I mean, like one of the things I sometimes think about is, should the two things just be two separate shows? Like, we do the show and we do the comments, and should they maybe be two separate shows? Because like one of the issues you run into is when you add the comments to the regular show, the thing gets a little bit long, which some people love. Not everybody necessarily does. Some people are comforted by shorter run times. So sometimes I do think maybe they should just be two separate shows. Yes, by the way, and Savannah Bryan's in there now. Brian, I don't know if you were listening earlier. I did give you credit before the show started. I did give you credit that you said you thought they're going to lose 100 games. I told you didn't think that, and I still think they're going to lose 100 games. Hopefully. But as I said, and I said this earlier today, I mentioned you by name. You are looking more right than not right now, unfortunately. Garrison Tucker wants to start a Braves Nation Daily. He says, "I'll invest to get it going." Garrison, I like that. I like that. I do sometimes miss talking about the other sports. So one of the reasons why I like doing like cruising around the SEC on our show is, for as much as I love Georgia football, and I do like talking about other sports too. I do enjoy that. Johnny Prescott going back to old school uniforms. He says those Mariner and Padres clown uniforms are some of the worst. He says the White Sox, when they wore short pants, that was probably better. I would say that Padres and Mariners are two of the teams in my lifetime who've had some of the worst uniforms. I think that's probably true. I don't know why they've fallen prey to that. It must be a West Coast thing. I think the Griffey era uniform that they still sometimes sort of wear now, I think that's actually a pretty sharp look for Seattle. I also think that San Diego, like the early 90s thing when they introduced the blue into their uniform, I really like that a lot. That's not a classic uniform for them necessarily, but I do like that. DT also reminding us. Yeah, so this is the kind of, see, like, obviously people are nostalgic for their era. This is not my era. This is, I'm assuming, a 70s uniform, right? This kind of reminds me of like Anchorman, Gene Tennis at the plate, whammy. That sort of feels like one of those type of deals for me. Like, this is not my era, so therefore I have no nostalgia for this at all. Like, it doesn't mean anything to me. And frankly, the 70s also had a lot of this sort of like two-tone thing where you're wearing, a color on your pant as opposed to like, say, a white or a gray. And I don't like that. I just don't. I don't like that. You see a lot more of that now too. That's Jim Leland right there. Now, I do remember which I think you call those like painter hats that the Pirates used to wear. Like, I do remember that. I also remember stirrups. You don't see a lot of, in fact, you don't think you see any stirrups anymore. But I do remember stirrups. I do. This would have been pretty close to Leland's first season as Pirates manager right there. Also, the one thing you see in the 80s uniforms that you don't, it's coming back a little bit now because everything kind of comes back around. 80s jerseys were not button up. They're kind of like pullover V-neck, which, if you weren't pretty rocked up, you had a hard time, making that look good, to be totally honest with you. You're seeing that kind of come back a little bit. But that's not necessarily the most flattering look. The painter hat, the pullover shirt, the stirrup pants, like, that is not an easy thing to make look good. But I do remember the Pirates had those. Which, by the way, not to open a can of worms, it's always interesting to me that we glorify pirates with our sports names. When you go back and look at the history of pirates, the fact that now we're like, go Pirates. When you look at what pirates have done throughout history, like when Thomas Jefferson was president, he declared war against the Barbary pirates. They were essentially terrorists. Like now, every sport's got its own share of like sort of pirate themed nicknames. It's a weird thing, isn't it? To me, that's weird. But perhaps a topic for a different day. SEM Dog says Kirby finally got justice, if not justice, for his recruiting philosophy. Yeah, no Justice Terry, no Justice Haynes, but Justice Fitzpatrick. Very good. And also SEM Dog spelled both Justice Fitzpatrick and Justice Terry correctly. That's another thing that, certainly the world of sports will challenge you on, is the spelling of some of these names. Let's see what else. A DT says Pirates preceded Brian Kelly as family. Yeah, that's like, I know that we are family Pirates, but that's also just slightly before my time. We Are Family, that's Willie Stargell, Bill Madlock, is that right? That's like 79. Is that about what that is? Like, is that about what that was? Like 79? Like, my earliest memories of being a Braves fan, I want to say Willie Stargell, the legendary Pirate, was the Braves first base coach. Giant guy, just big guy, gigantic man as the first base coach. But yeah, great former Pirate. Really, I think this is true. I think Stargell's the only guy to hit the ball out of Dodger Stadium. And he hit the ball up. He hit, back in the old days of those like space saucer looking stadiums, he hit upper decks all the time. I want to say he's, maybe it's changed. Maybe Shohei will do it one day. I think Stargell's the only guy to ever hit the ball out of Dodger Stadium, I believe. Because, they have that, like, it would have been possible to do that, at least, theoretically. Senior Dog 54 says, I like the Connie Mack look. That's back when guys wore suit. Like, Connie Mack wore a suit, right? Everybody else is in the uniforms. Connie Mack wore a suit. I do think it's interesting that baseball managers do wear uniforms. This is not true anymore, but here's the other thing I used to think was weird, and this is why I don't get much done in life, because I'm always thinking about weird stuff. If you ever noticed this, and this is not, post-COVID, this is not a real thing anymore, but football coaches, like watch Kirby Smart during the dog walk. Kirby Smart shows up to the venue wearing a suit, but he changes into athletic gear to coach the team. But in basketball, it was the exact opposite. That basketball coaches would show up to the gym in athletic gear and they would change into a suit for the game. Now they just wear athletic gear all the time. But I always thought that was really weird how opposite the two sports were. Dog walk, coach wears the suit, or the other, coaches do the same thing. They all wear suits and ties to the stadium, to the venue, and they put on their athletic gear to coach in. But in basketball pre-COVID, it was the exact opposite. I always thought that was weird. Let me go to Facebook. Garrison Tucker says, "Do you think Ohtani pitches in the regular season this year?" I saw him. I saw him throwing a bullpen session the other day. I guess they're at least going to consider it, right? He's such a valuable hitter. You got to be careful, I guess. But I did see that. Oh yeah. By the way, Georgia just acquired out of the transfer portal a two-way player. I think he was from Seattle University or something like that. He happens to be Japanese. He's also a two-way player. I don't think he's as good as Shohei Ohtani, but I did think that was kind of interesting. First of all, you don't see as many two-way players in college baseball as you used to. Apparently, Georgia's got one coming in, and he is Japanese. They would change into a suit for the game. All right. Billy Cloud also remembers going back to Fulton County Stadium. That was always good times. Yeah, I went to a lot of games there. Also, we used to always have Little League Day there. Of course, I played, it wasn't Little League, it was Dixie Youth, but you'd have the local youth league teams. They'd all get to have their day. And so you'd have Hall County Day at Fulton County Stadium. Everybody got to walk around the field. That was always really fun. Always really fun. Barry Watkins says he would not pitch Shohei Ohtani. Yeah, I mean, it's cool that he can do both. And he is a legitimately good pitcher, of course. But boy, when you're this good of a hitter, man, that's a big risk. Ralph Price says all the Gunnar Stockton talk from the national media reminds me of the Stetson Bennett days, which resulted in 2 national titles. I do like that. That's fun. I do like that. Ken Holcomb says, I hope the California Branch brothers are somewhere close to being as tough as the California tight end named Brock Bowers. He says, not all those California guys are soft. He says, just the majority. That's fun stuff from Ken Holcomb. Yeah, maybe that'll be the case. Brian Whitaker says, my first Braves game was in 91 when I was 7 years old. Charlie Lee Brandt pitched. Mark Lemke hit a home run. Been to at least 2 games a year every year since then. See, that's cool to think. So if you're Brian's age, except for a small blip on the radar in say about 10 years ago, the Braves have been good for his entire life. If you're 7 and 91, for as long as you can remember, the Braves have been a contending playoff level team. That's really good. It may not be that way this year, but boy, what a lifetime of fandom that is. Barry Watkins says that Murphy hit it out of the old stadium. I don't think that's the case. I don't think you could hit it out of Fulton County Stadium. I don't think you could do that. Barry Watkins also asking about Sedarian Morgan, I think. I don't have huge confidence in Georgia with Morgan, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Bill Sanders said he went to his first baseball game in 1970. So you got kind of every sort of realm here. You've got relatively new Braves fandom, at least in terms of the last couple of decades, and going all the way back to 1970, which would have been Atlanta's second year in it. Braves' second year in Atlanta at the time. Savannah Bryan says, my first Braves game was circa 85 at Fulton County Stadium against the Montreal Expos. I feel like I saw the Expos kind of roll through there a lot. My first game would have been around that time. First game I really remember going to was probably in 86, because I do think they were still wearing the white, white and the sort of royal blue look. I think they were still wearing that my first game I went to. Or should say the first game I remember going to. I know I'd been to a game prior to that, but I only have the vaguest memory of that. UJ Marine, yeah, I think the Braves will offer those sort of small ticket packages. If you want to do just Friday night games, or if you want to do just rivalry type games, kind of pick out some of the bigger opponents. I think they try to get pretty creative about that, and I think they'll let you kind of mix and match your own package if you want to. Billy Cloud says he misses Larry Munson on the radio listening to the Dogs. Yeah, I do too. I do too. Always good stuff. Always good stuff. Garrison Tucker says my first Braves game was when Andrew and Chipper were rocking. Yeah, those were good times. Those were good times. Baruch Dog's first Braves game, he saw a Hideki Nomo pitch. We talked about Nomo yesterday because it was the Rookie of the Year battle in '95 between Chipper and Nomo. Hideo Nomo, yeah. Low Country remembers 1982. Now, I don't remember 1982, but I do know that's the year they started 13-0, which set the National League record for most wins. Brewers tied it 5 years later. And then the Braves almost gave it up at the end of the year, but did win the division. I don't really have a memory of that. I was alive. I just don't remember it. But I do know about it. Are we going to get ready to go? Spencer Clark mentioning dog racing and roller derby. So I don't know if there's still dog racing or not, but there apparently is still roller derby, which I love wrestling. I never really got into roller derby, but apparently there is still roller derby. Jonathan Aaron mentioning kind of like the lack of complete games. Yeah, like the one thing that Major League Baseball just does not want you to do anymore. They don't want you to face the same batter 3 times. Like that's really where the complete game thing comes from. Is third time through the lineup, these hitters are just getting a little bit more comfortable with your arm angle and your velocity and your pitch location. They're just sort of settling in on you a little bit at that point. Spencer Clark mentioned the Greyhound races. Some would say an important part of Alabama's football history. Let's see what else. G. Gray says the track is still open. So do they still have the dog races? Do they still have that? But that's, I guess, nice to know. Nice to know. You don't see a lot of, it's interesting. You have the dog track in Alabama, but they don't have a lot of gambling though. Other than that, they don't have a lottery. They're one of, I think there's only 9 states that don't have, legalized sports wagering. Obviously Georgia's one of those, Bama being another. So it's interesting that a state that has so little in the way of gaming does have the dog track. That's kind of interesting. All right, we got to go. Jacob O'Neill's first game was when the Upton brothers were on the team. We played the Rockies, so there you go. Yeah, so that's a fun era too. All right, we're going to go. Get ready to sign off for today. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all that today. Hot weather, air conditioning, get it tuned up to factory fresh specs. Plumbing emergency, go ahead and get your water heater replaced if you need to the same day. That's one of the RS stands for rapid service. You can trust RS Andrews on all of that. Y'all have a great day. We'll come back, see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.